Trump's return to the White House, many people do view this as a sign of the accelerating decline of the US empire. And a really key feature of Trump's international policy has been the US administration's erratic use of tariffs. So what we wanted to discuss with you is how are these tariffs impacting Latin America and also the region's orientation moving forward? Obviously, you've mentioned how, the United States has really sought to dominate the region, but in the last couple of decades, we've seen a real blossoming of economic ties between Latin America and the Asian superpower China. So how did this sort of policy of the United States impact those dynamics?
Yeah, I will leave the relationship between Latin America and China to the last part of the conversation, if that's okay, because it especially requires some specific discussion. But Trump and the United States uses sanctions or unilateral coercive measures. This is their favorite tool. The problem has been this: the United States has been declining so badly in the last period. When you look at the figures, possibly it's been declining for 50 years. But now in the last period, become very intense, very deep. Just to give you a few figures, not too many. The United States GDP is $30 trillion, which is, one of the biggest, in nominal terms, economies in the world. Its debt, its public debt, is 37 trillion. And that is to say, where the United States use everything it produces in 1 year to pay the debt, it will still owe 7 trillion. The combined GDP of the whole of the Latin American countries together is less than 6 trillion. That gives you an idea of the problem. And the United States, because it's been performing economically very poorly, there are many reasons. I don't want to go into too many details there. But because the United States decided to deindustrialize and move its manufacturing sector outside the United States, it got weakened. And then because it financialized the economy by concentrating too much on speculation. The consequence of that was a poor performance, which is in the region in the last 20, 25 years, 1% to 2% per year on average, which is very weak. If you compare that with China, just to put that as a footnote, China was in the crucial period of an average of rate of growth of about 10%, 8%. And now it's about 4 or 5%. So China is going to grow in the next 10 years at something like 50%. The United States is going to grow by about 10%. So that gives you an idea of where they are. So the United States, therefore, was importing much more than it was exporting. Sometimes from their own companies outside, but that produced trade deficits which were ginormous. So a poor economic performance on top of a poor exporting performance, plus massive, really, really massive military expenditure, which at the moment is reaching something like 1 trillion per year, which is extremely onerous because the United States doesn't have the capacity to produce that much wealth in order to sustain it. And on top of all of that, 20 years of US wars in the Middle East not only meant that the United States lost them all, although it caused a huge amount of damage and destruction and death and so on in that region. The cost to the, as we say in the UK, to the exchequer, to the treasury, was in the region of $9 trillion. All of these things, have compounded themselves to make the United States to be in extreme crisis. So what the United States is trying to do, rather than accept the rules of the World Trade Organization, which it imposed in the past, is now trying to actually set the terms of the international agenda with the wrong policy, even to strengthen the United States, which is tariffs. That is to say, the United States wants to be in a position that it determines what is the relationship it's going to have with any country. It's going to say, you're going to buy my stuff at the price I want to tell you, and you're going to sell me what I want at the price I'm going to fix. That's basically what Trump is trying to do. And therefore, the application of tariffs, I think, at the moment, is a policy of intimidation of the rest of the world. It started from the most cowardly of them all, which is Europe, which, has been successful so far anyway, as we can see. And then it's trying to implement this with everybody. But to their disappointment, I suppose, they haven't been very successful of intimidating too many. Many countries, in my view, if you look at Canada, Brazil, Mexico, and so they're saying, okay, we'll stand up to you. But the worst part of it has been the response of China, which has been extremely robust. And I think they won this first round very massively, and the United States had to capitulate quite humiliatingly. Not that the media are going to tell you this, but that's the case. So now he's going for the BRIC countries. Brazil has been attacked because Brazil belongs to the BRICS. And you can tell the timing of it. The threat of a 50% tariff on everything Brazilian was imposed the day after, Lula ended up the meeting of the summit of the BRICS. So it's clearly going for the BRICS. And the intention of the United States by intimidating countries into compliance is twofold. One, to dictate the terms of the trade to their favor. But number two is to force countries to stop trading with China with the intention of weakening China in order to actually create the conditions for an attack in the future, because they clearly say openly that they're preparing themselves for war with China, which is incredibly ridiculous. However, the United States doesn't have the understanding, certainly Trump doesn't have the understanding how tariffs works. What it means is going to be the United States going to isolate itself economically, and everything the United States is going to import is going to be very expensive for the population of the United States in the context of the bill which they just passed, or a law they just passed, which is a massive assault on the population of the United States. Something like 70 million people in the United States, as a result of that law, which is austerity, are going to lose their medical cover, which is not brilliant in the United States, but to lose it all is gigantic, and so on. So what Trump is doing is accelerating the decline of the United States, even though it's causing a lot of disruption around the world. And certainly Latin America, as a target is sort of, it's reasonably or relatively weaker position compared to, say, China or other players.
Can you expand a little bit more on Brazil? Because two things kind of coming up to me when you were talking about Trump using these tariffs as a way to try to control BRICS countries, but also I don't understand how it would work as sort of like a disincentive to work with China. Could you clarify what the reasoning is for that? Because we know that with Brazil specifically, he's pledged that 50% tariff, as I think you mentioned before. It's due to come into effect on August 1st. And Trump is using this pretext or justification that it's about former far-right President Bolsonaro's trial. Do you actually find that to be credible in any way, that that is the justification for why he's putting that 50% tariffs? Or do you think it is like mainly about BRICS and China? And like I said, explain that a little bit more, but also can you expand more on also how Brazil is responding to the tax?
It's a pity that Trump was not sent to school to learn mathematics, because he doesn't understand one bit, one iota of tariffs. He doesn't. Somehow he's been persuaded by some entourage of very incompetent people from the point of view economics, certainly, and I would say politics as well, that this is the right approach for the United States. What the United States is trying to do, or Trump is trying to do, is trying to redress the trade deficit is got with almost everybody else, literally everybody else. He believed that by imposing taxes on, whatever you import to the United States, the importer is going to pay. So if China sends stuff, he thinks they're going to pay, but actually he's wrong. The consumer in the United States, the companies in the United States, if you buy steel and you have a tariff of 50% from wherever it comes, the manufacturer in the United States, which is going to use that steel, is going to have to pay that 50%. So it's totally wrong. I think the way it works with Trump following, ever since 2016 US politics, almost daily to understand it. The way it works is like this. When he's in trouble by something he's done, he finds a distraction. But the distraction always fits with what he wants to do anyway. And he presents it in a very outrageous manner. So one good idea why not, was to say, I want to defend Bolsonaro and I want to apply tariffs to Brazil. So the intention in this particular occasion, apart from the fact that he wants to apply tariff to Brazil, is that he wants to distract people away from the Epstein files. Now, the problem is this, is totally unjustified. The reason is this. If the United States, Trump, were to be justified by applying tariffs to countries with which it has trade deficits, one could say, well, that's the reason. But in the case of Brazil, Brazil had a trade surplus with the United States only back in 2007. Ever since then, the United States has a trade surplus with Brazil. In other words, Brazil is better off. And the region of the amount of money, the trade surplus, is in the region of 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 billion per year. So it's Brazil which is losing out. And Lula said, I'll reciprocate. Whatever percentage you apply to me, I'm going to apply back. And that's the first reaction that government should have. Not necessarily that that's going to be the final position. And the reason is, whatever you say is going to have an impact on the stock exchange in your country. So therefore, to say immediately this is very important indeed. That's number one. The second thing is that in terms of Bolsonaro, the Brazilians have not given 1 inch. In fact, they are intensifying, the investigation and the trial against this crook. He tried to organize a coup d'etat, not 1-3, as far as we know. Then he was part of a conspiracy to actually even assassinate the president of Lula. There is people who have been investigated under detention that declared publicly that actually they had that sort of things in plan. Some of them said, I put in an email sort of as a thought that I wanted to come back to later on. So that's number one. And what the Brazilian government is doing at the time right now is that Mauro Vieira, who is the foreign relations minister, is saying that he wants to start seeking negotiation with the United States, with the US administration, which is the correct thing to do. So the first thing you do is you take a strong position and then you say, let's talk and let's see whether we can come to anything. One thing that Lula made totally clear, which was part of the threat from Trump, was Lula, will not allow the United States companies to control our minerals. We will control them, which was clearly part of the deal or part of the threat. Brazil has some rare earths, which are very important, in current technology. So this is not going to happen. And the person in charge of the investigation, who is a judge of the Supreme Court, Alexandre Moraes, he is so determined to ensure that there is justice. And the Supreme Court, that used to be quite right-wing, now is sort of quite interesting. I'm not saying left-wing, but, it's sort of doing justice, which is the right thing to do. Is very determined to ensure that all of these people are tried. And Eduardo Bolsonaro is somebody who may be tried for treason because he's being indicted for negotiating with a foreign power. Guess who that foreign power is? For the foreign power to bring sanctions against his own nation, which in Brazil carries a very heavy penalty. So all of that is going on. And then Foreign Minister of Economics of Brazil, Fernando Haddad, has said that they're preparing the ground to ensure that they protect jobs when and if tariffs hit them. So they're taking all the measures. In other words, they're sending signals to Trump to say, do you want to fight? Okay, we'll have to fight. We don't want to, but we'll fight. Otherwise, we can negotiate. So in that sense, it's very important. And finally, I think it's quite important to say this. Lula was in trouble because the economy cannot take off because the central bank is fixing the interest rate very high, 10.5%. And the reason is the central bank is autonomous and is run by a Bolsonarista guy. And, the government is desperate to try to sort this one out and it can't. So it's economic sabotage, really. Nevertheless, as a result of Trump's threats, the Bolsonaristas have been weakened because it's against the nation, and Lula's been strengthened. And they just scored a fantastic victory, which I want to finish this item with, which is Brazil, because of the Lula's policies ever since he became president recently, Brazil is not in the hunger map of the Food and Agriculture Organization as it was before. So that's a fantastic one. And they said we're going to deepen this. So I would say this round has been good for Brazil, but there are more rounds to come.